Welcome to Week 4 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Carson Fox, and this week our focus turns to the Carnegie Mellon University Tartans, who are in year 2 of rejoining the PAC as an affiliate football-only member, and have shown offensive prowess through 2 games with the NCAA's rushing leader in the backfield. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll take a look into the program, highlight the week that was, and preview Saturday's matchups to get you ready for the upcoming weekend. Make sure to stay tuned following the Football Focus. 2 other Waynesburg University students and I will bring you the PAC Pregame Show, in which we'll take a look back at the week that was and spotlight the headlines of Week 4. Head coach Rich Lackner is in his 30th year at the helm of the Carnegie Mellon program, which has seen widespread success as both a member of the President's Athletic Conference and University Athletic Association. He's the winningest head coach in program history. He's won 9 total conference championships between the PAC and UAA, and has also been inducted into the Western Pennsylvania Hall of Fame. He recalls his fondest memories and some of his best coaching wisdom that he's instilled in his players over the last 3 decades.
Some of my greatest memories are of championship seasons, whether they be PAC championships, UAA championships. Certainly, the 2 seasons where I was the head coach and we went to the NCAA playoffs, 1990 and 2006, were certainly special seasons for us and certainly great memories. You have to be patient with young men at times. I also have learned over the years that young men are looking for discipline and structure and focus and accountability, and I think that we bring that out in them through football, and I think those are lifelong lessons.
As many know, Carnegie Mellon University is renowned worldwide as being one of the finest academic institutions in the United States. When it comes to balancing rigorous classwork and life on and off the field, Lackner says it all comes down to one thing for his players.
Well, the biggest challenge that our kids have here is time management. It's not that they can't do the work and can't do football and enjoy their social life. It's just a question of managing that time appropriately. It's sometimes a work in progress. Usually by the second semester or their third semester here, they're usually experts at doing that. But the big challenge they have coming out of high school is managing such rigorous academics, the expectations that we have within the football program, and still being able to have a social life.
After spending 14 seasons as members of the UAA, Lackner says rejoining the PAC positively impacts his program most in 2 ways.
I think rivalries are going to develop as we continue to play within the PAC. I think that's something that happens over a period of years. I don't think it's happens over a year or 2. I think one of the positive things is that the level of competition within the PAC is very, very, very good. I think that prepares all schools well if they do get into a postseason play of some kind, whether it be an NCAA invitation or an ECAC invitation. I think the competition within the conference prepares you well for those types of challenges, and if you play any non-conference games.
The Tartans are led by sophomore running back Sam Banger, who after bursting onto the scene in last season's finale by rushing for 175 yards against Washington University in St. Louis, has dominated the competition through 2 games this year. Currently, Banger leads all rushers in Division III with 253 yards per game average, and he even broke the school record for rushing in a game last week with 303 against Washington and Jefferson. Lackner has high praise for his sophomore leader.
He's a great student. He's a great role model for all members of the football team, no matter what year they are, because, frankly, I would find it hard to find another player on the football team who works as hard as Sam does in practice. He's just a bulldog. He does everything with 100%. His academics, his off-season preparation, his preparation in the summer for preseason camp, and certainly once he gets on the field in practice and in games, he doesn't understand anything but 100% all the time. And you take that type of attitude, that type of demeanor, that type of being, and you add to it a young man who has just excellent physical tools. He's fast, he's quick, he has great vision. You put all that together and you've got a pretty darn good running back.
Behind center, the Cardinal and White are led by senior quarterback Andrew Herron, who has had his ups and downs in 12 career starts, with 4 of those starts resulting in wins. Lackner believes in his senior season, his best could be ahead of him.
First of all, he's a captain, so his leadership is excellent. He's probably his worst critic. He expects perfection as well, and when he doesn't perform at the level that he expects, he's very hard on himself. He just is a very driven young man. He's an engineer here at Carnegie Mellon, a great student. In fact, I think last football season he had a 4.0 in the fall semester. So it just gives you an idea of the drive that he has and the determination that he has, and he feels much more comfortable in our offense this year with our new offensive coordinator. And I think he'll continually improve.
With Banger doing most of the work for the offense in Week 2, wide receivers John Prather and Graham Schilling had quiet games. But in Week 1, the two combined for 17 catches for 211 yards and 2 touchdowns in a loss against Washington, and will be reliable options in the passing game for Carnegie Mellon if, according to Lackner, the offensive line can give Herron time to get the ball to them.
They're both very fine receivers. They understand the game. They have good skill sets. They have good hands. They have good timing. They have the tools, the speed, etc. They know how to get open. We've got to protect. There are a whole lot of things that go into having a successful passing game. More than just having a good quarterback or capable receivers, you also have to have an excellent line to protect your quarterback and get the ball off. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but certainly they're two very, very fine receivers, 2 great targets for Andrew.
Through 2 games this season, the Carnegie Mellon defense has struggled to keep opponents off the scoreboard, averaging 42 points allowed. Lackner believes his defense can rebound moving forward.
I think both games, we showed signs of being a good defensive football team. We just weren't consistent, and we've made some mistakes, and we continue to correct and coach and hopefully get better on the defensive side of the ball. I think the talent level is there. I think the desire is there. The attitude is there. The skill set's there within all the defensive players. We just have to keep our mistakes to a minimum, and those mistakes have come back to haunt us at times.
This past week, CMU fell to W&J 38-14 at home, despite setting the tone early in the first quarter with a 51-yard rushing touchdown by Banger and trailing at halftime by just 10 points. Lackner viewed the game as a measurement to the 3-time defending conference champions and said the offense suffered a setback with just 58 passing yards on the day.
I thought the effort was excellent. We did not perform well in terms of our passing game. It was disappointing, and there were a whole lot of things to that, from protection to quarterback read and throws to receivers dropping balls. There were a lot of factors that go into it, but you kind of get an idea of where you are as a program based on teams like W&J and Thomas More, the teams that have been the perennial powers here most recently in the PAC. It kind of gives you a baseline as to where you are and where you need to get to be more competitive. And certainly I give W&J a lot of credit. They played a fine football game, and they certainly earned the win.
Up this week on the road, the Tartans have Geneva, who they defeated last season by just 1 point, and 2 years ago, the game was decided in double overtime with a 41-34 win thanks to a Max Reinertsen rushing touchdown. This year is no different, according to Lackner, as he expects another hotly contested matchup.
The last couple of years we've played Geneva. It's kind of come down to the wire every one of those games. Gino does a great job. His coaches do a great job. His kids are prepared. His kids are well coached. They have good personnel. We're going down to their place. So it should be a very fine football game. We're expecting a good, tough battle, and that's what we expect every week in the PAC. There's no time to take weeks off. You do that, and you end up with an L. We'll have a great week of preparation, and we trust that Geneva as well, and I'm sure it's going to be a great football game.
The CMU defense will have to rise to the occasion this week to stop sophomore quarterback Aaron Channing, who recorded a 300-yard, 5-touchdown performance a week ago against Waynesburg. From Lackner's viewpoint, his defense will have to keep its composure to limit his opportunities and not give up the big play.
He's a young quarterback who looks like he's really coming into his own. He'll certainly present challenges to our defensive secondary and linebackers, and you hope to do with a quarterback with his skills is keep him contained somewhat. He's going to complete balls. You just can't get flustered. Let's face it. He's going to complete some balls to some very fine receivers. It's just a question of trying to keep him contained.
After going 0-2 to open the season, Lackner does not believe this is a national title contending year for his Tartans. But his goal for his team moving forward really comes down to one aspect: improvement.
I consider every game a winnable game, no matter who we're playing. I'm looking for improvement on my football team each and every week, and I think this is a work in progress. I set goals of us getting better every week, and if we get better every week and we improve and we correct the mistakes we made, we put ourselves in a better position for a win, and that's what you attempt to do week in and week out.
Thanks again to head coach Rich Lackner and Carnegie Mellon University for being featured as this week's PAC Football Focus. Coming up next week, we'll focus on the Grove City Wolverines and the longest tenured head coach in the conference, Chris Smith, as he embarks on his final season at the helm of the program. Stay with us. After the break, it's the PAC Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org.
I'm Joe Anderko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
And welcome back. It's the PAC Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org. Week 4 action. Carson Fox alongside junior Andy Stanko and senior Sean Saputo. Guys, glad to have you back with us here on the show. And let's tune it back, dial it back to Week 3. Are there any games that really surprised you in the highlights of Week 3?
Quite honestly, every single game except for, of course, Thomas More and W&J rolling. Geneva beating Waynesburg by 17 points. Case Western coming out and beating St. Vincent 49-14 after St. Vincent beat Waynesburg the week before. And then Westminster going to Bethany and winning. Those are all 3 results that I could have made arguments for the other team coming out on top. Really, the PAC being shaken up, thrown on its head for the most part outside of Thomas More and W&J. And really, there is no such thing as traditional powers outside those 2 teams. Waynesburg and Bethany were teams that were right there the last few years, and now all of a sudden they're both 0-1. And Case and Westminster are certainly teams to be reckoned with moving forward.
Couldn't agree any more with what you said there, Andy. 3 games that were surprises in the PAC. Case Western started the season off with a loss. St. Vincent coming off a nice 28-21 victory over the Yellow Jackets of Waynesburg, and then come out flat against Case Western in that 49-14 loss. So 3 games that we were impressed by, but again, Thomas More and W&J proving its superior strength in the PAC.
To go back to Case Western Reserve, you have to credit really, it was a full team effort. And we'll get into this matchup whenever we break it down. But Rob Kuda, solid day. If there was a PAC Offensive Player of the Year to watch list already through 3 weeks, he's got to be at the top. 23 for 30, passing for 236 yards, 4 touchdowns, while also rushing for 145 yards. And then on the flip side, Evan Sheminsky leaving that game early changed the whole complexion of the game, with Shavonte Kraft only having 24 yards rushing, a tough pill to swallow for St. Vincent's best 2 offensive playmakers, and sensational day by the Spartan defense. But to highlight a team you mentioned, Thomas More looks to be like an unstoppable force of the conference so far through 3 games, going up 4 45-0 on Teal into the third quarter. A sensational day for quarterback Jensen Gebhardt, 18 for 25 for 320 yards passing and 4 touchdowns. And another team you hit on, Westminster, defense looking strong, forcing 5 Bison turnovers. We remember last year how the Titans started off the season 0-5 and then rattled off 4 wins in the second half of the season. It looks as if that momentum is really carried over this year, and they're playing much more competitive football than what we've seen out of Westminster in the last 3 years.
And I'd absolutely agree. When you look at the schedule for last season for Westminster, they have the identical schedule this season. A lot of challenging games right off the bat. You have W&J, Bethany, and Thomas More to start the season. These are games 2, 3, and 4 of the Paul Colombo era with so many young skill position players on the outside and in the backfield for Westminster a season ago. You can really see the maturity in this offense. Paul Colombo turning more into a game manager and letting those 3 running backs just go to work. And the defense and the progression that it's made, especially in terms of stopping the run, has impressed me thus far this season.
All right, so let's break it down. Our first matchup, a 1 o'clock kickoff in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, feature the number 13 team in the country, the Thomas More Saints, jumping ahead of the Washington and Jefferson Presidents in the D3Football.com Top 25. 3-0, 1-0 in conference play at Westminster, who's coming off that 38-24 win against Bethany on the road last week. They host this game. But Thomas More has never lost to Westminster as a member of the President's Athletic Conference, dating back to when the team joined the conference in 2005. Guys, break it down for me. Saints, Titans, what do we see in this matchup?
Thomas More averaging 64 points per game through its first 3 games. Big win against the St. John Fisher team ranked at the beginning of the season. Breezed by win against Hanover, and then another coast to a win against Teal this past week, 60-12. C.T. Tarrant has proven he can take the reins as the lead back with Dominique Hayden gone. 12 carries for 115 yards and a touchdown. And the receiving core for this Thomas More team has helped Jensen Gebhardt immensely early on in the season. Week 1, it was Tyler Vogelpool. This past week, Goose Cohorn, 10 receptions, 216 yards, 2 touchdowns. However, the one thing that Thomas More has been doing, and we've seen in the stat sheets lately, is turnovers, fumbling the football. Against a Westminster team that played a W&J team very well, I'm anxious to see if turnovers against this Westminster defense could cost Thomas More, possibly in this game, especially on the road.
Who would have thought coming into this season that the top quarterback in the PAC in terms of touchdown passes and the top 2 receivers would be coming out of Thomas More, when traditionally they've been such a powerful rushing offense with Dominique Hayden. Jensen Gebhardt really just a game manager for the Thomas More Saints. And you look at the receiving core, you touched on Cohorn and Vogelpool. Cohorn leads the PAC in receiving. Vogelpool is second in receiving. Both have 4 touchdowns, which is tied for first in the conference. And you mentioned Vogelpool's Week 1 performance. That set a school record for Thomas More in terms of yards in a single game, only to be broken a couple weeks later by Cohorn just last week. This is an offense that's just, it's a heck of a challenge for anyone coming up against it, averaging 64 points per game, almost 600 yards of total offense per game through the first 3 weeks. And for Westminster, defensively, that's been the story for them, holding W&J to 87 yards on the ground, picking off Pete Coughlin twice to lead to 14 points. 5 turnovers against Bethany. Gator Phillips, 2 interceptions last week. Matt Quinn, 13 tackles, 2 for loss, a forced fumble, half a sack. Holding Bethany 4 for 13 on third. Westminster has certainly lived up defensively to any expectations and exceeded expectations for me. But really, Thomas More offensively, wow, what more can you say?
And really, when you look at this game with Thomas More, you wonder, will they be looking ahead? Next week is that matchup with W&J and Crestview Hills, Kentucky. So if Thomas More looks ahead of this Westminster team, Westminster, like I mentioned not too long ago, proved that they can play with the juggernauts.
This might be their toughest test on the road.
35-31, lost to W&J on the road. Will Thomas More look past Westminster, or will Thomas More continue its role that it's been on the first 3 weeks and go into that W&J game 4-0?
And also keep in mind, this is the first Saints road contest of the season after starting out with 3 home games. But backtracking to 2014, this was really the Dominique Hayden show when he rushed for a PAC and Thomas More single-game record of 336 yards and scored 4 rushing touchdowns. C.T. Tarrant chipped in with 102 yards on just 9 carries. I think this is becoming a 1-2 punch once again, with now Tarrant taking the lead, Javier Pitts being the 2 in that 1-2 punch. I don't think a 152-yard day, two touchdown pass, and interception-like performance for Colombo, which he had last week against Bethany, can keep up with this record-setting Thomas More offense that is going to ground and pound all game long. Jensen Gebhardt looking solid in the passing game as well, as you guys mentioned. But I think Westminster likewise is developing to be a ground and pound team this season. They're still trying to figure out what they have at receiver. It was tight end and fullback Michael Frankowski who broke out with a solid day last week against Bethany. 6 catches, 71 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Maybe he's the go-to passing option that Westminster's been looking for through 3 weeks. But really, another respectable day for the duo of Dominique McKinley and Kimu Kim combining for 121 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And then defensively, the whole complexion of the game mentioned, as you mentioned, Andy, the Gator Phillips interception that was returned for 89 yards to the house, and he was rightfully named the PAC's Defensive Player of the Week for his efforts. Jensen Gebhardt coming off arguably his best performance as a Saint. They have the two-headed monsters I mentioned in Tarrant and Javier Pitts, and this defense has yet to allow more than 12 points in the game this season. It's a tall task to ask for Colombo and the Titans this week, but they've already proved they can take W&J to the wire, so don't count them out in this contest. But it will fall on Paul Colombo's shoulders to lead the Titans to victory.
Westminster leading the PAC in terms of takeaways, led W&J with just 2.5 minutes left in the game a couple of weeks ago. But as you said, Carson, this Saints defense, 6 points per game allowed, under 215 yards per game allowed, leading the PAC in sacks. Opponents convert on a quarter of the time on 4th down. Haven't allowed a 4th down conversion. They're the least. It's hard to find a weakness with Thomas More. We've said this about WJ. We've said this about the Saints. That's why they're ranked 13th in the country. That's why they're the highest ranked team in terms of the PAC. They leapfrogged W&J from 15 to 13. But Westminster, it's about taking care of the football and taking the football away. They've made a statement against W&J and a statement against Bethany. I certainly think they're the 3rd best team in the PAC today, and they certainly deserve their vote for an honorable mention outside the top 25 in the American Football Coaches Association.
And for Westminster, I think to get on track in this game early, much like Teal did in the first quarter, only trailing 7-0, Westminster's going to have to win the battle in the trenches. Make sure Dominique McKinley can get his run game going, and if he can do that, I think Westminster has a good shot to keep it close, but maybe not too close. This Thomas More team is just a powerhouse right now, and that showdown next week is going to prove who the best truly is.
It will truly be a challenge. But let's move on. We have the Case Western Reserve Spartans, who are on the road, 1-1 overall, 1-0 in conference play, coming up with a big win last week against St. Vincent at the Teal Tomcats, who are 1-2, 0-1 in conference play, a 1 o'clock kickoff in Greenville, Pennsylvania. And Case currently owns a 3-game winning streak against the Tomcats, with the last Teal win coming in the year 1981. 82 miles separate these schools, making it one of the closer venues for Case Western Reserve to participate. And really, guys, when you look at it last year, this was a back-and-forth game for 60 minutes in which Case Western Reserve pulled it out at home 23-16. Teal tied the contest with a field goal with under 3 minutes to play, but then starting quarterback Billy Beecher led the eventual game-winning drive, which was capped with a 23-yard touchdown pass to wide receiver Luke DeFrancesco. Teal quarterback Ryan Radke attempted to counter and advance to the Spartan 40-yard line, but he was intercepted by Scott Soren, and the Spartans came away with a win. Guys, what do we see between the Spartans and the Tomcats?
Well, if you're Case Western, you have to be really, really encouraged in what you've seen in the first 2 games out of this team, especially out of this offense. After scoring 30 points in week 1, winning 49-14 last week in a PAC opener, only scored 30 or more twice in 2014. They've matched that in just 2 contests this season. Rob Kuda over 300 yards in week 1, passed for 236 yards and 4 touchdowns in week 3, as well as rushing for another 145. He leads the conference in terms of passing yards per game, 7 touchdowns without an interception, 5th in rushing yards per game. Ryan Radke might have some competition in terms of the best dual-threat quarterback. Pete Coglin's up there as well. But Rob Kuda is certainly impressive in his first series of starting for Case Western. But what's been the biggest thing for me for Case Western is how they have a +3 turnover margin. That's the best mark in the PAC so far, only 1 giveaway in the season. And they've only allowed Kuda to be sacked once. They played well. That's all I really could have asked for so far. They were lackluster offensively last year. They couldn't turnovers. They were dead last in the conference when it came to taking the football away from opponents. And the team has an earlier path this season. I'm not sure if Teal, Waynesburg, or Bethany are all better than they were last year. And they had a 24-10 lead over Chicago in Week 1 and allowed 3 fourth-quarter scoring drives. It could have easily been a win. So Case Western really is a team trending up for me in the conference.
And the defense is what I want to key on for Case Western. 3rd in scoring defense, allowing 22.5 points per game. Currently 10th, though, in the PAC in passing defense, allowing 276.5 yards per game through the air. But the run defense has been superb, 53 yards per game allowed on the ground in its 2 games. There are so many weapons that this defense has altogether. The leading tacklers the past week against St. Vincent in what was a huge win had 5 tackles. Justin McMahon, Dayton Snyder, and Aaron Weisberg all had 5 tackles to lead the team, which shows the depth of this defense. 13 tackles for loss, caused 3 turnovers, 2 by fumble, 1 by interception, 5 sacks against St. Vincent. This Case Western defense has proven that it has gotten stronger from last year, and as Andy said, Rob Kuda taking the reins over for Billy Beecher and doing a fantastic job.
I'm going to hit on one play that might go overlooked from this contest and what was a huge win, 49-14 against St. Vincent last week. Exactly. You hit it right there. After Case Western Reserve scored its second touchdown to go up 14-0, head coach Greg Deblack makes the bold call to an attempted onside kick. Kicker Juan Kuhn Park, excuse my if that was pronounced incorrectly, kicks a beautiful ball deep into Bearcat territory, and the Spartans recovering it, setting them up with great field position. They score on the next drive, and momentum is completely on their side. What a call. Great execution in all 3 phases of the game. Evan Shuminsky exiting the contest early definitely changed the complexion of this game, but what really a statement win for a Case Western program that, as we mentioned, had its struggles in the first year in PAC play. And coming up strong thanks to Rob Kuda going 236 yards, 23 for 30 passing and 4 touchdowns, while adding 145 rushing yards on the day. Really the sky is the limit for this team, with their 2 toughest matchups, W&J and Thomas More, being played at home. But on the other side of the ball for Teal, this is an opportunity really for Teal's defense to rise to the occasion. Currently, they're last in scoring defense, allowing opponents to score 44 points per game. They're second last in total defense, and they've allowed opponents to score every time they've reached the end zone. And Teal's offense is predicated on running the football, especially like they did in Week 1 when they had 2 100-yard rushers and they owned the time of possession. You can't do that when you have deficits of 3 scores or more like the last 2 weeks. So I think this could be another huge day for Rob Kuda and this offense that looks to be back at full strength with 2014 PAC honorable mention wide receiver Brendan Lynch back. He led the team with 8 catches for 85 yards last week. As you mentioned, Sean, this defense gets after you. 5 sacks, 13 tackles for loss last week. This is a tough challenge for Teal, even when it's played at home.
And Ryan Radke will be pressured in this game, and we'll see if his mobility will be able to break around the edges. As Case Western we saw last year, they like to bring the outside linebackers in blitz 6-7 at a time. So we'll see if Radke's mobility is capable of being used. If not, he doesn't have Marcus Williams anymore, and that's a big target to lose in terms of the receiving core to bail Ryan Radke out if necessary.
Teal's another one of the teams. Waynesburg falls in this category where it's really struggling because of the turnover, new guys coming into new roles. A lot of the games that Teal lost last year, they were competitive in for at least a portion of the game. They were able to beat St. Vincent, CMU, and Grove City, and made life interesting for Waynesburg, Case, and Thomas More, and Bethany for at least a half, but You can't say the same about this year's team. The only player with a carry from last year's team is Ryan Radke, and their leading receiver, Alex Horbititz, 16 catches, 149 yards, 3 touchdowns last season. He was the third or fourth option on last year's team. 5 of the 6 top tacklers, all gone. It's challenging. This offense is a touchdown worse from scoring 28 points per game, being that upper half, to 21 points per game. The defense is 10 points worse, 34 points per game to 44 points per game. That's last in the PAC. They're a team that's really in an adjustment period right now.
All right, so let's move on. Another matchup in a game that we are all keeping our eyes on and will be in attendance at. A 1:30 kickoff in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. The Jackets, after having 3 straight road games, come home to the friendly confines of John F. Wiley Stadium. They enter this game 1-2 overall, 0-1 in conference play. Likewise with the visiting Bethany Bison, 1-2 overall, 0-1 in play. Waynesburg leads the all-time series 29-18-7, but Bethany has won back-to-back games versus Waynesburg thanks to late-game heroics in the final minute of regulation. Remember, 2 years ago, it was a 68-yard touchdown pass from Matt Grimard to Eric Blinn that put Bethany up 27-20 at John F. Wiley Stadium. And then last year in Bethany, Larry Potier intercepted Carter Hill in the end zone as time expired, and Bethany went on to win 33-27, a critical conference loss that set the Jackets back in the PAC standings all season long. In that one, Waynesburg coming up with a win at Bethany 3 years ago, one of those critical wins that set them up to be co-champions of the President's Athletic Conference. Guys, it's been a rivalry now for 3 years between head coach Bill Garvey and head coach Rick Shepis of Waynesburg. What do we see in the Bison versus the Jackets?
Well, right now for Waynesburg, you have an ailing, injured secondary, losing corners Josh Mundell, but more than likely for the season. Dante Gibson was out last week as well due to injury. Tevin Odom out as well due to injury last week. He didn't even travel with the team. So that left Zach Snydak, Justin Wilco, and Derek Caldwell as the 3 corners. And we really only saw Caldwell and Snydak out on the field. And when you're going up against the Bethany Bison, the only one that you can truly look on film and key up is Eric Blinn. Westminster did a good job last week against Eric Blinn, holding him to just 5 receptions for 65 yards. But for Waynesburg, with the secondary right now, allowing 312 yards in the air to Aaron Channing, who hadn't thrown for 300 yards except for last year against Waynesburg, and 5 touchdowns. He repeated that performance again. This Waynesburg team is going to have to key up on Eric Blinn, and if that's the point of emphasis, then you'll see Jalen Holmes with the ball, carrying the ball. But the Waynesburg front 7 has played well so far this season. John Collier leading the team with tackles, led the team again last week with 8. However, the defense only had 3 tackles for loss, a fumble recovery off a botched punt by Nate Cannon, and 1 sack in the game. However, 2 Waynesburg Yellow Jackets vying for 100 tackles in their career. Zach Machuga with 96, Aaron Palmer with 93. They are 2 leaders on that defense. We'll also see what Jake Doherty can do, going 24-40, 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. An efficient day nonetheless, but Jerry Lawman as well, 1 carry in the second half as compared to 15 in the first.
Carson, you mentioned the history between these 2 teams the past few years. And by and large, most of the Yellow Jackets who were influential in the outcomes of those games are gone. Most notably last season, Jake Forsyth, Carter Hill, some of those guys on the offense. So you've got a completely new Yellow Jackets squad against. There's quite a few cats from Bethany who are back, especially including Nadeem Radar on the front line, the linebackers Donovan Hayden, Larry Potier, who are all guys who have been there and done that. One concern for the Bethany defense is how opponents have scored in all 12 red zone possessions against them. I still think they still have pieces to clean up. But when you look at this Bethany offense, what they were able to do against Teal's defense, 185 yards, 3 touchdowns for Eric Blinn, and the way that Waynesburg played last week against Geneva, especially in the pass defense, I'm inclined to think that Waynesburg, as of today, is closer to Teal's defensive unit than Westminster's defensive unit. But you have to look out. Lincoln Reyes for Bethany did not play well in his PAC opener. 4 interceptions, under 200 yards, no touchdowns, under 50% passing. He was someone who was passed over in favor of Brian Vales, who didn't have a great year last year, threw more interceptions than touchdowns. So Bethany was a team that I had penciled in number 3 behind Thomas More, W&J. But after that loss to Westminster, I don't really know where to place them. And with Waynesburg, I'm starting to push them down the standings, or in how I think about the conference, maybe a middle to a bottom middle tier of the PAC. So this is a chance to really see what Waynesburg has, but another chance to see Jake Doherty continue to progress. I think the mistakes he made against St. Vincent weren't replicated against Bethany. He's not in that place where they can rely on him to convert third and long situations, which not a lot of quarterbacks are. So I think he improved in terms of not floating balls, not throwing interceptions, but there's still plenty of room to go for the freshman.
And then going back to 2014, Waynesburg played its worst football of the season in the first half against Bethany. The offense failed to score a point, totaled under 100 yards of total offense, and every offensive drive either ended in a punt or turnover on downs. Whereas on the flip side, Bethany used its up-tempo offense to gas the Waynesburg defense. Eric Blinn had a 41-yard touchdown reception. The Bison went into the half up 19-0. Jake Forsythe played like a man amongst boys in the second half, running for 183 yards and 2 touchdowns, including a 70-yard touchdown run that may have been the play of the year for Waynesburg. The defense settled down a bit, but Blinn and running back Brandon Hill had solid games, over 100 yards each. It all came down to that fourth quarter last-minute drive that Hill wasn't able to capitalize on. So hopefully if Waynesburg gets into that sort of a situation this year, they can capitalize it from the mistakes of last year. But it was seeing it firsthand. I haven't seen a game that Waynesburg's pass defense struggled as much as it did last week since 2013, when the Jackets gave up almost 50 yards per completion to Jensen Gebhardt on the road in a 49-28 loss. And Aaron Channing really looked like Aaron Rodgers on the field, passing for 312 yards, 5 touchdowns. And Dylan Jones had his second consecutive solid game with 83 yards as he nickeled and dimed the Jackets on run plays. I think if Waynesburg struggled with David Koloski and Nick Cook, I can only imagine the damage Eric Blinn is going to do against this secondary. And if Lincoln Reyes can just take care of the ball, I think he's in for a big day against this injured Waynesburg secondary. But on the flip side, the Jackets have to play physical with the same type of demeanor as they did against Muskingum when they forced 5 turnovers. Didn't force any turnovers over the last week against Geneva, if you don't count the Nate Cannon special teams fumble. They also didn't force a turnover against St. Vincent. Offensively, I'll be curious to see if Jake Doherty challenges this pass defense downfield if they trail by double digits in the second half. But against a Nadeem Radar-led defensive line, that is a challenge for any team in this conference to stop Nadeem Radar, and I expect Bethany to continue to send pressure like they do each and every week. All right, well, let's move on. Our second to last matchup, the St. Vincent Bearcats, 1-2 overall, 0-1 in conference play at the Grove City Wolverines, who are 0-2 overall. They're beginning their conference season this upcoming week in a 2:00 game in Grove City, Pennsylvania. Grove City owns the all-time series lead, 6-4. But we remember last season when St. Vincent, coming off its first win in over 2 seasons, carried the momentum in its next game against Grove City and beat the Wolverines 31-14 at home. And that was just a 17-14 game into the fourth quarter until 7 minutes remaining, when the Bearcat defense came away with a momentum-changing play. Rennie LaRue Holloman recovered a fumble and returned it 51 yards for a touchdown. SVC added another touchdown later in the quarter to put the game away, but it was definitely a closer game than what the scoreboard showed. Guys, 2 teams that are looking to start off conference play with a win. St. Vincent looking to rebound after losing to Case, and then Grove City suffering a tough loss, a tough pill to swallow 2 weeks ago, 21-16 loss to Geneva. Guys, what do we see in this matchup?
I'm still encouraged, if I'm Grove City, by what I've seen this season in the 2 losses, especially defensively. In that 25-16 loss to Geneva, the Grove City defense allowed 2 scoring drives of under 50 yards in the first 3 possessions, and then didn't allow Geneva to score for 10 consecutive drives. The team really did its job. It got off the field. It forced the turnovers when they needed them. Kyle Bayer, 10 tackles, 3.5 for loss, a blocked kick, and a sack. Grove City's last interception offensively was in the end zone at the end of the game. They needed a touchdown because of a blocked extra point that was returned for 2 points. So instead of the score being 19-17, it was 21-16. It's just these little things now that are still working against the Wolverines. They haven't won a game in over a season. They didn't win a game last season. And that's just how it goes for teams that are struggling. And I think they will break through and win a football game this year because I think they found their guy in Antonio Carosia, who did throw 5 interceptions, but he was also sacked 7 times. And 4 of the 5 interceptions came in the Grove City final drives in the 3rd and 4th quarter where they needed a touchdown to win the game, and the only way to do that was to push the ball down the field. I don't have a problem with numbers like that, especially considering those circumstances, especially considering Grove City had net negative rushing yards, gaining 60 yards on the ground but losing 87 yards on sacks and snaps that didn't go to the quarterback. They were 3 for 14 on 3rd down. They failed in 3 red zone possessions, 6 penalties for 80 yards, 0 for 3 on 4th down. The offense made things really challenging to win the football game. I'm still encouraged by the play of Josh Peach as a receiver. Caught another touchdown in this game. Brett Pinson caught a touchdown, 4 catches for 119. That's a great day from the receiver position. Grove City just needs to keep on working. I think they have a win in them this season, and I've liked what I've seen out of the Wolverines so far.
Yeah, and you mentioned him, Josh Peach, finding his niche finally as a wide receiver on this team. Played quarterback before, gets the move to wide receiver. 9 receptions for 100 yards in week 1, 6 for 64 yards and a touchdown in week 2. As you mentioned, the defense played well against Geneva, holding them to 21 points. However, you're facing a different dynamic with this St. Vincent team in terms of Damon Black and Dustin Lohman at the wide receiver position. Also, another name that they'll have to key on. He hasn't been,
He's been quiet, Shavonte Kraft.
He's very quiet so far early, Shavonte Kraft, as Andy just mentioned. He's gone unnoticed so far on the ground this season, so we'll see if Shavonte Kraft can pick that up. However, when you look at St. Vincent, we'll see if Evan Shemensky, being injured, will he play this game? Or will we see Tyler Donahue? But despite whoever you see, Donahue went 13 of 21 for 226, 2 touchdowns, and an interception against Case. Damon Black, 8 receptions, 159 yards, and a touchdown. But for St. Vincent, you got to get the run game going. 27 total yards on 30 carries for this run game against Case Western. So this game, definitely a toss-up. These two teams vying for a win. As Andy said, Grove City's definitely going to win a football game or 2, maybe 3 this year. St. Vincent, a program on the rise. Definitely a tough matchup this week in the PAC.
And just to add to how well the Grove City defense played against Geneva 2 weeks ago, holding Geneva to just 202 yards of total offense while forcing 2 turnovers and adding 12 tackles for loss. At the end of that day, that was just a tough pill to swallow for a team that is striving to break a 12-game losing streak. And like you said, Sean, obviously the biggest question mark is whether we see Tyler Donahue or Evan Shemensky behind center in this contest, because we've seen firsthand how dynamic he is in this offense when he's healthy. If it's Donahue, Kraft and Gennard Dorsett will have to step up in the backfield, but either way, this offense still has weapons, whether it's Damon Black, who had 8 catches for 159 yards and 2 touchdowns, Dustin Lohman, who tore up Waynesburg for over 100 yards 2 weeks ago, Ariel Martinez, or even Kraft in the receiving game. Expect head coach Ron Dulciato to drop some creative yet easy plays for Donahue to get the ball in their hands. But on the flip side, Antonio Carosio must take care of the ball against one of the most aggressive blitzing teams in the PAC that is full of ball hawks in the secondary. But how rattled is this defense going to be after allowing 400 yards to Rob Kuda of Case Western Reserve last week? This game comes squarely down to if the Wolverine offensive line can win the line of scrimmage for 60 minutes, give Carosia protection. The 2 running backs in Grove City's offense was only able to generate 51 rushing yards for its 2 backs. That's not good enough. That's not going to cut it if you're going to want to win against this St. Vincent team that we've said is on the rise. Just had a bad game last week.
I have 2 quick points to make. Unlike the week before for St. Vincent against Waynesburg, they weren't able to force turnovers. They had 3 giveaways in the game. They got beat in special teams on the onside kick, and typically, to be perfectly honest, St. Vincent wins the special teams battle in the kicking game, in the return game. And another concern is only the 3 takeaways through 3 games when they had 28 just a season ago. I'm not sure how seriously we can take these offensive numbers yet as a team for the season because of the Week 1 game with John Carroll. I'd expect to see more of Szymanski that we saw against Waynesburg, 288 yards, 4 touchdowns. The thing is, how much of that was Szymanski? How much of that was Waynesburg's pass defense? And as we spoke last week on the Waynesburg football show, if last week was a trend showing St. Vincent still going up, I think they're a team that's in the mix right now, but they still have more to prove moving forward.
I couldn't agree any more than with what Andy said. Evan Szymanski, we'll have to see if, that was a day where he just took an ailing secondary for Waynesburg, or if he really is the real deal. We'll have to see if he plays in this game. But Tyler Donahue, like I had mentioned before, proved, I think, that he is a comparable backup to Evan Szymanski with the way he played against Case Western.
All right, let's move into our last and featured matchup of the week. It's the Carnegie Mellon Tartans, winless on the season, 0-2, 0-1 in conference play, losing to W&J last week at the Geneva Golden Tornadoes, who are 2-1, 1-0 in conference play. It's a 3 o'clock kickoff in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, where the Golden Tornadoes are one of the toughest teams in the conference when they play at home. Carnegie Mellon owns a 14-9-1 record against Geneva, including the last 2 contests that have come down to the wire, 22-21 at home last season and 41-34 at home in double overtime 2 years ago on homecoming. And in last year's matchup, Geneva really dominated Carnegie Mellon offensively in yards, 453 to just 176, but 3 interceptions derailed the Golden Tornadoes' day, especially one that was returned by Vince DeMarchi, 84 yards for a touchdown late in the third quarter to put the Tartans up 2 scores. Geneva led a comeback behind backup quarterback Nick Cook. He threw for a touchdown after CMU added a field goal. Unfortunately, the failed 2-point conversion proved to be the deciding factor because they scored on the final play of the game and converted on the 2-point play but fell by just 1 point. Guys, what do we see between the Tartans and the Golden Tornadoes in a tough Beaver Falls environment?
Positives and negatives came out for the Carnegie Mellon Tartans against W&J. The positive, Sam Banger, 303 yards, 2 touchdowns against what is a stout W&J defense who really only lost in that front 7, Jared Pratt from last year. He picked them apart for over 200 yards in the first half, but the passing game needs to be improved right now for Carnegie Mellon. Andrew Herron, 11 of 34 for 54 yards and an interception. Not going to get the job done against most teams here in the PAC, which is showing right now where you have to rely on Sam Banger to pick up the majority of your offense. The defense, however, allowing nearly 600 yards of offense to W&J, 594 to be exact. However, the positive for Carnegie Mellon, 5 double-digit tacklers on the day, including Drew Fitzmaurice and Stanley Bekulig with 12 tackles each, 10 tackles for loss, an interception, and 2 sacks on the day for the Tartan defense, despite getting picked apart for almost 600 yards. But for Geneva, can Aaron Channing repeat his performance of last week against Waynesburg and not go down a slide, especially after being injured last year? You have to mention that with Aaron Channing. He did get injured. Didn't throw, only 2 games over 200 yards. We'll see if Aaron Channing can repeat his performance. Dylan Jones as well. Can he continue his positive burst that we saw a couple years ago out of him? And can Geneva's defense continue to play solid?
I have no idea what's more surprising, the fact that Sam Banger ran for 300 yards against W&J, or the fact that Carnegie Mellon only scored 14 points. When you have a guy who have rushes of 51, 46, 85, and 66 yards, but 1 touchdown, you have to look at the quarterback play. Andrew Herron, 11 for 34, 54 yards, an interception. Carnegie Mellon faced 13 third downs, 11 third and long, 6 or longer. Herron was 1 for 11 for -5 yards and 2 sacks. It's really challenging to win a football game with quarterback play of that caliber. The team was 4 for 17 on third down, 1 for 3 on fourth down, never reaching the red zone despite the runs of that length and 14 points to show for it. Some of that you have to look at the quarterback play. And W&J just doing their thing. Over 100 plays again, almost 600 yards of offense, as Sean alluded to. Ryan Ruffing, Pete Coughlin did their things. 230 yards on the ground for Ruffing, 300 plus for Coughlin, 4 touchdowns without an interception. This whole game sort of felt like the second half of week 1, where the team only scored 7 points in the second half, 1 for 9 on third down, and a loss to Chicago. And in the loss to Chicago, 2 red zone chances that they came up empty, a pass play at the end of the half that goes for 55 yards but's tackled inside the 10. And in this game, 2 turnovers in the first 3 drives, spots Washington and Jefferson 10 points, a pick 6 late puts this game on ice. CMU today doesn't have it all together offensively. Defensively, they have to deal with the inconsistency of the offense, but no one really stands out on either side except for Banger. CMU has put up a ton of yards in the first 2 games, 918 yards of offense in 2 games, but just 38 points to show for it. And then you have the last in pass defense, last in sacks and interceptions. Opponents convert half the time on third down, 10th in turnover margin, the worst red zone offensive and defensive units. Fortunately for them, they've got Geneva, who, while they beat Waynesburg last week, isn't a team that sort of scares you in the PAC when you look at some of the powerhouses. And you guys hit it right on the head with Aaron Channing. What version of Aaron Channing are we going to get? Are we going to get the super Aaron Channing, who's lit up Waynesburg, or the Aaron Channing that everyone else has been able to get? One thing I liked from Geneva last week, holding Waynesburg to 86 yards on the ground. We'll see how they fare against Sam Banger, who's the hottest running back in the PAC, if not Division III.
You guys said it well. There's very little I can add. I just think the storyline in every CMU game going forward this year, Banger's going to shoulder the load. And even though Geneva's rush defense is 3rd best in the conference, allowing just 101 yards per game thanks to that 3-5-3 stack defense, I'd expect Banger to continue to get a number of touches. As head coach Rich Lackner said, they are going to get him the ball. Just the question becomes, and you mentioned, is Andrew Herron going to have a bounce-back game and take care of the ball against a Nate Cannon, Tim Martin, and Thomas Benyo-led secondary? They put those 3 players out on islands, and so far this season, other than in that Frostburg State game in Week 1, they've fared well having to do it on those islands. And as you said, the same difference with Aaron Channing. Lights up Waynesburg last year for 300-plus yards and 5 touchdowns. Then he came back down to earth. No more 300-yard games and just 2 200-plus yard games. He was accurate throwing the ball downfield on Waynesburg all night long, and even had a touchdown pass that he just overthrew his man by just about 2 yards. Could have had 6 touchdown passes in the game. And running back Dylan Jones, who's able to accrue solid chunks of yardage when Channing is able to open it up in the passing game. A very balanced attack for this Geneva offense against Waynesburg a week ago. This is a favorable matchup for Channing against the CMU pass defense, as you mentioned, Sean, giving up a league-high 373 passing yards to its opponents. We know how tough Geneva is playing at home, so this is a very competitive game on paper. Let's just see if Herron can balance it out, if he can play well in the passing game.
And this is one Geneva, with the schedule they have the rest of the way, they've been a pretty favorable schedule early on. Grove City, Waynesburg, now CMU. But after this, Thomas More, Case Western, Bethany, W&J, St. Vincent, Westminster. Really, when they're at home against a team of CMU's caliber, coming off a loss like they had last week, this is one Geneva really should go out and get if you're the Golden Tornadoes coming off such a win. And offensively, they really impressed me, especially the way they used formations to dictate to Waynesburg's defense and how they handled that. You saw Waynesburg forced into a lot of nickel and sub packages, getting those linebackers, the front 7 that you mentioned, Sean, that's been so effective. They have to come off the field, and Waynesburg's defensive backs have to be the focus defensively in the pass game, and that's really been a place where they struggled. And scoring drives of 50, 63, 86, 7, they marched on Waynesburg's offense, getting chunks of yardage, 7 for 13 on third down. So I was really impressed, especially with the run game as well. That's something you don't traditionally see out of Geneva. Dylan Jones, over 100 yards a week ago, 83 in this, or 2 weeks ago, 83 in this past game, over 4 yards a carry, 3 catches, 52 yards out of the backfield. A really complete game from Geneva. And at home, you have to like the Golden Tornadoes here.
Yeah, and one last note I want to give is the wide receivers Devin Koloski and Marcus Wagner with their 5 receptions, 94 and 92 yards respectively with 2 touchdowns apiece. We'll see if Geneva, who we've seen in the past, struggled to see who their targets are going to be. It changes all the time. Will we see more of Koloski and Wagner this year? Week 1 it was Colton Boer. Last week it was Koloski. This past week Koloski as well. 2 weeks ago, excuse me. So will we see more? Will we see more weapons used for Geneva, or
Nick Cook throw in there?
Nick Cook. Are we going to see more weapons, or have we seen now what Geneva has to offer?
Well, guys, I greatly appreciate your analysis, as I have the last couple of weeks here, and I appreciate it here for the PAC Pregame Show. Thank you for tuning in, for all of our listeners out there all across the President's Athletic Conference and your fan bases. Make sure to tune in next week for the PAC Football Focus. We'll be talking to the longest tenured head coach in the PAC in his final season at the helm of the program. That's Chris Smith of Grove City. And next week, we'll recap Week 4 and we'll talk Week 5 of PAC action right here on the PAC Pregame Show. Thank you for tuning in here on PACathletics.org.